carving the boat. Gu Yan was still clutching a Vernier Caliper in his left hand when he plunged from the window of the 39th floor lab. The man who pushed him was Shun Duanming, his business partner, the chief architect he had personally recruited back from Silicon Valley, the best man at his wedding. During the fall, Gu Yan saw Shun Duanming lower his head to light a cigarette. The flame of the lighter flared briefly in the 39th floor night wind, illuminating a face he had known for 12 years. There was no anger on that face, no fear, not even guilt. Only a sense of unburdened relief, as if he had finally resolved a problem that had dragged on far too long. Gu Yan smashed through the glass canopy on the 27th floor, clipped an air conditioning unit on the 19th, and finally landed on a heap of renovation debris piled on the podium rooftop. His spine fractured at the 5th lumbar vertebra, his right femur shattered, his spleen was pierced by bone shards, and intra-abdominal bleeding exceeded 2,000 milliliters. Blood gushed simultaneously from his mouth and ears, soaking into the crushed asbestos tiles beneath him. His left hand was still holding that Vernier Caliper. The tip of the caliper bore a trace of blood. It was from a gash he had managed to carve into the back of Shun Duanming's hand with all his remaining strength right before he was pushed. The wound wasn't deep, but it would leave a scar. He'd had only one thought at that moment. If I'm going to die, I'll leave something on your hand too. But what Shun Duanming didn't know was that before he fell, Gu Yan had already pressed the remote destruction switch in his pocket. That switch was linked to the lab's central server. Within 0.3 seconds of being pressed, all the core architecture files in the server labeled Songming were overwritten with a layer of dummy data. The real source code was transferred to an overseas cold storage node, registered under a false name. What Shun Duanming would get was an empty shell. Lying amid that pile of debris, Gu Yan stared at the sky sliced into a single strip by the tall buildings. His consciousness was dissipating rapidly, vast swaths of black encroaching from the edges of his vision. He could hear music coming from inside the building. It was the celebration banquet for Songming, having just passed the National Major Science and Technology Special Project Acceptance Review. The music was an old song called Auld Lang Syne. He had chosen that song because he felt the project had been built by everyone together. The celebration should feature a song that belonged to everyone. On the acceptance report, the name signed under chief scientist was Shun Duanming's. Gu Yan closed his eyes and felt that this time it was truly the end. A startup founder pushed from a 39th floor window, fallen in a corner where no one could find him, clutching a useless caliper, dying in silence. But he did not die. 12 years later, Suzhou. At the very end of Taohuawu Street stood a clock and watch repair shop, only a single door wide, squeezed between a century-old shop selling Suzhou-style pastries and another 100-year-old store dealing in writing brushes and inkstones, so easy to miss you'd walk right past it. The shop had no sign, only a sheet of printer paper taped to the glass door, with 4 characters printed in Song typeface. Precision Repair. The shop owner's surname was Yi, given name Jiqiu. The neighbors called him Mute Yi, because he couldn't string together 3 sentences in a day. From dawn to dusk, he sat in that cramped shop, wearing a German-imported loupe magnifier, repairing all manner of clocks and watches brought to him with tweezers and a screwdriver. There were Patek Philippe minute repeaters, Vacheron Constantin tourbillons, and also ordinary old Shanghai brand mechanical watches passed down through generations of common families. His hands were impossibly steady. He could diagnose the eccentricity error of a balance spring without disassembling the movement, purely by feel, with a precision controlled to within plus or minus 0.01 millimeters. The old master watchmakers from the Suzhou Horological Society came to observe once and left in a collective, prolonged silence. One of the elderly gentlemen said that level of craftsmanship shouldn't be used to repair watches. It should be used to repair aerospace gyroscopes. Yi Jiqiu never responded to such comments. He opened the shop at 8 every morning, closed at 9 at night, repaired 10 to 15 watches a day, charging anywhere from 300 to 3,000 yuan each. The money was just enough to rent a 400-square-foot old house in Taohuawu and afford 3 bowls of Suzhou-style noodle soup a day. No one knew his past, and no one noticed that every time he finished repairing a watch, he would write a dense string of symbols on the back of the receipt. Those symbols looked like gear meshing diagrams yet unlike them, like differential equations yet more complex. 12 years. He had accumulated over 40,000 such receipts, each one filed in an archival envelope, numbered and locked inside the metal cabinets of the small storage room behind the shop. If those symbols were pieced together and translated into engineering language, they formed a complete design proposal for an entirely new type of high-precision inertial navigation system. It was not based on traditional laser gyroscopes, nor on fiber-optic gyroscopes, but on an entirely new principle he called the cold atom interferometer gyroscope, which redefined the concept of stillness from the physical ground up, near absolute zero. The interference fringes of atomic wave functions could measure angular velocity changes as small as 1/1,000,000th of a degree per second. Once completed, this system would force a complete and fundamental reshuffling of all global submarine, intercontinental ballistic missile, and deep space probe navigation. It was called Cuzhou 2.0. Its predecessor had been called Cuzhou. 12 years earlier, when Guyen wrote the first line of simulation code in that Beijing laboratory, Shen Duoming was still working as a hardware engineer at Apple in Silicon Valley, earning $800,000 a year, living a decent but boring middle-class life. It was Guyen who had taken a 13-hour transoceanic flight to personally invite him, sketching the core principle diagram of the cold atom interferometer gyroscope on a napkin in a Japanese restaurant in Cupertino. Shen Duoming stared at that napkin for a long time, then said, "Give me 3 months." 3 months later, Shen Duoming flew back to Beijing, bringing a small team he had poached from Silicon Valley. Guyen shared every technical detail of Cuzhou with him without reservation, because they were brothers. Because at the wedding, Shen Duoming had raised his glass and said, "You two are the most perfect match I've ever seen," and his eyes had reddened. Guyen believed him. He was wrong. 12 years later, Yi Zhiqiu sat in his clock repair shop in Suzhou's Taohuawu, using an ultrasonic cleaner to clean the movement of a Rolex submariner. A beat-up old cell phone with a shattered screen, propped on a stand nearby, was live-streaming a special program from the CCTV National Defense and Military Channel. On the screen, a grand auditorium at a ministry compound in Beijing blazed with lights. A red banner reading "Warm congratulations on Songming Autonomous Inertial Navigation System, passing full military design certification." Shen Duoming, wearing a crisp Major General's dress uniform, his chest covered in military medals, stood on the stage receiving an award from Central Military Commission leaders. On the back of his left hand was a faint white scar, the one left 12 years ago by a Vernier Caliper. As he shook hands with the leaders during the ceremony, that scar flickered in and out of visibility under the magnesium lights. The voiceover intoned in a sonorous voice. The Songming system, independently developed over 12 years by the team led by academician Shen Duoming, is our nation's first inertial navigation system to achieve strategic-grade precision, its comprehensive performance surpassing the latest models of the American and /APG series, marking a historic leap for our nation in the field of autonomous navigation, for strategic weapons from following to leading. The audience roared with applause. In the very center of the front row sat a woman. She was dressed in a well-fitted military green suit, the rank of senior colonel on her shoulders, her hair done up in an elegant bun. She was Shen Duoming's wife, and also the director of the project's chief engineer office. Her name was Lu Jiao. She was Guyen's ex-wife. On the night Guyen fell from the building 12 years ago, Lu Jiao had sat outside the ICU through the entire night. The doctors said the survival probability was less than 3%, and told the family to prepare for the end. She crouched in the hallway, her fingernails gouging into her palms until the skin broke, blood dripping between her fingers onto the floor tiles. 3 days later, Guyen pulled through the critical phase but was told he would be permanently paralyzed from the lumbar spine down, destined to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. 2 months later, Lu Jiao married Shen Duoming. 4 years later, she stood alongside Shen Duoming on the stage of the Great Hall of the People, holding the certificate for the National Science and Technology Progress Award Special Prize, her smile gentle and restrained. Now the live broadcast camera gave Lu Jiao a close-up. A reporter asked her how she viewed outside skepticism regarding the technological origins of Songming. Her reply was watertight. Military industry personnel don't need to justify themselves. Every blueprint, every line of code, every test record for Songming is documented and verifiable. Those questioning voices are nothing more than attempts by elements with ulterior motives to discredit our nation's independent innovation capabilities. The reporter then asked, "I've heard that your ex-husband also worked in the inertial navigation field back then?" Lu Jiao lifted her chin slightly, her tone carrying a meticulously controlled coolness. "Some individuals did indeed perform some early-stage foundational work for this project, and we have always maintained due respect for them. But the success of a system belongs to the team, not to any single individual." Yi Zhiqiu fished the Rolex movement out of the cleaning solution, dried it with an air blower, and checked the lubrication state of the jewel bearings against the light. His fingers were steady, his breathing even, his expression unchanged. Only he knew that the titanium alloy support inside his lumbar spine was beginning to ache dully. The rainy season in Jiangnan was approaching. 12 years now, and whenever rain was due, that support reminded him punctually. He was still alive. He was alive, he could still walk. His lumbar spine embedded with 6 titanium alloy screws and 2 titanium rods, and every time he stood up he endured pain unimaginable to an ordinary person. But he stood up every single day. Because you couldn't repair watches sitting down, because you had to stand to see clearly how the gears meshed. The live broadcast continued. Shen Duoming announced major news. Songming 2.0 would be formally installed next month on a new generation of strategic nuclear submarines, elevating the navigation precision of our nation's second-strike nuclear capability to an unprecedented level. Simultaneously, the civilian version of the Songming system would be promoted for applications such as high-speed rail dispatching, deep-sea exploration, and civil aviation navigation, projected to generate over 500 billion yuan in direct economic benefits for the nation within 3 years. As soon as the news broke, the stock price of Duoming Inertial Navigation, effectively controlled by Shen Duoming, surged 61% on the star market, its market capitalization breaking 800 billion yuan. Yi Zhiqiu fitted the repaired Rolex back into its case, wiped the dial with a chamois cloth, and placed it on a watch timing machine to calibrate the movement. The timing machine printed out a rate curve, with a daily deviation of plus or minus 0.5 seconds, more than twice the SOSC chronometer standard. He placed the watch into an anti-static bag, wrote a line of symbols on the back of the receipt, assigned it a number, and put it in the drawer. Then he took off the loop, stood up, and stretched his stiff lumbar spine. The titanium alloy support emitted an extremely faint metallic friction sound, audible only to his own ears. He glanced at the phone screen. Shen Duoming was now taking photographs with the CMC leaders on the live broadcast, exuding confidence and vigor, the scar on the back of his hand starkly clear under the magnesium lights. Yi Zhiqiu dialed an encrypted number. A young woman's crisp voice came through, tinged with the hoarseness of an all-nighter. "Old Gu, I've finished tracing the entire supply chain of Duoming Inertial Navigation. The cold atom chip they're using, the core process comes from a Swiss company called Presimotion. This company was secretly acquired 3 years ago by a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I penetrated 6 layers of nominee holding structures. The ultimate beneficial owner points to a fund in Luxembourg. The fund's name is Abyss." Yi Zhiqiu was silent for a moment. "My own fund? No need to investigate that," he said. "Tell me something I don't know." Achi whistled on the other end of the line. "All right, boss. Then I'll tell you something you definitely don't know. 3 days from now, Shen Duoming is hosting a private dinner in the VIP hall of the Geneva International Watch Exhibition, entertaining the core members of the Swiss Horological Society. He's going to announce at that dinner that Duoming Inertial Navigation is officially entering the high-precision civilian timekeeping market, with the debut product called Songming Time Pivot, touted as redefining time with strategic-grade navigation technology. I've already memorized the tagline, precision, beyond navigation. Yi Zhiqiu turned off the watch timing machine and extinguished the lights in the shop one by one. Book me a ticket to Geneva. Use the identity Yi Zhiqiu. Achi's fingers tapped rapidly on the keyboard. Booked. Economy class window seat connecting in Zurich. Want me to book a hotel? Yi Zhiqiu locked the shop door, pulled down the rolling shutter, and turned the key in the lock 3 times. No need. I don't plan on staying at a hotel. He stood in front of the shuttered door for a moment. The night in Taohuawu was very quiet, willow branches by the river swaying in the spring breeze, the street lamps casting dappled light and shadow onto the bluestone pavement. He pulled out his phone and checked the calendar. Today was April 14th. 12 years ago today he had been lying in the ICU, and Lu Jiao had been crying in the hallway. 12 years ago tomorrow, Shun Duoming had used forged authorization documents to erase his name from the position of project chief designer. 12 years ago the day after tomorrow, Lu Jiao and Shun Duoming had registered their marriage. He put the phone back in his pocket, bent down and picked up a ginkgo leaf from the ground. Ginkgo leaves fell later in Suzhou than in Beijing. In April the leaves were still a tender green. He pinched the stem gently between his thumb and forefinger, twirled it, then tucked the leaf into the notebook he always carried. The title page of the notebook held a faded photo, a group picture of the entire Kazhou project team from 12 years ago. Over 30 young people crammed into the lab, laughing at the camera. In the very center of the photo, Gu Yan and Shun Duoming stood side by side, Shun Duoming's left hand resting on Gu Yan's shoulder, both of them giving a thumbs up. At the edge of the photo, Lu Jiao looked sideways at the lens, the corners of her lips carrying a faint smile. He closed the notebook, placed it in the pocket of his work jacket, turned around and walked into the night of Taohuawu. 3 days later, Geneva. The International Watch Exhibition was being held at the Palexpo Convention Center on the shores of Lake Geneva. Gathering the world's top watch brands, the exhibition halls filled with priceless tourbillons, minute repeaters, and perpetual calendars. And deep within the VIP hall, a private dinner closed to the media was underway. Shun Duoming had booked the entire Lakeview Hall, inviting all the core members of the Swiss Horological Society, several retired senior Swiss military officers, and the CEOs of several top European luxury goods conglomerates. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lakeview Hall lay the nightscape of Lake Geneva, the jet dough shooting into the night sky like a pillar of silver under the illumination. Inside, crystal chandeliers glittered, and waiters in white uniforms wove through the crowd carrying champagne. Shun Duoming was dressed in a bespoke dark blue suit, a pocket watch tucked into his left breast pocket. That was the latest prototype of the Tsongming time pivot developed by Duoming Inertial Navigation, its case forged from grade 5 titanium alloy, its movement integrating a micro-cold atom interferometer module, its timekeeping precision touted to reach an error of no more than 10 to the negative 12th power of a second per year, purportedly a full order of magnitude more accurate than the world's most precise atomic clocks. Holding a champagne flute, he stood amid the crowd, chatting and laughing in fluent French with the president of the Swiss Horological Society. We Chinese use sundials, water clocks, and incense sticks for thousands of years to measure time. Tonight, the Tsongming time pivot will redefine time itself. The president of the Swiss Horological Society was an old gentleman with snow-white hair who had spent his entire life working on traditional mechanical timepieces. Upon hearing this, a complex emotion flickered through his eyes, but he ultimately raised his glass politely in salute. Halfway through the dinner, Shun Duoming signaled the band to stop playing and walked to the small stage at the front of the Lakeview Hall. On the stage sat a display stand covered with a red silk cloth, beneath which lay the debut piece of the Tsongming time pivot. He cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I will present to you a product that will rewrite the history of timekeeping. But before I unveil it, I would like to tell a story. He took a sip of his champagne and swept his gaze across the room. 12 years ago, my team and I began the development of the cold atom interferometer gyroscope in a humble laboratory in Beijing. At that time we had nothing, no funding, no equipment, no prior experience to draw from. Someone asked me why I wanted to do this and I said, because the Chinese people need their own strategic-grade inertial navigation system. We cannot let anyone strangle us by the throat. He paused, his voice lowering slightly. In these 12 years I have lost a great deal. I lost time with my family, lost a normal life. But what grieves me most is, I lost a brother who once fought shoulder to shoulder with me. He was an early member of the project, later left the team for personal reasons, and thereafter had an accident. He lowered his head, as if in remembrance. Today, if he were still here, I believe he would be proud of me. A few soft sighs arose from the audience. Several elderly gentlemen from the Swiss Horological Society looked on with expressions of sympathy. Shun Duoming took a deep breath, lifted his head again, and resumed his signature confident smile. Alright, let's not dwell on that. Let us return to time itself. He approached the display stand and reached for a corner of the red silk cloth. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to unveil the Tsongming time pivot. The red cloth was pulled away. On the stand lay an exquisitely beautiful pocket watch, its titanium alloy case gleaming cold under the lights, its dial a deep blue enamel face upon which the patterns of a starry sky were traced with extremely fine silver threads. The back of the watch was transparent sapphire crystal, clearly revealing the internal structure. A micro-cold atom interferometer chamber, a laser frequency stabilization module, a vacuum encapsulation unit, all integrated into a circular cavity less than 4 centimeters in diameter. A collective gasp of admiration filled the room. Shan Duoming smiled contentedly and reached for the pocket watch, preparing to present it to the distinguished guests in the front row. The instant his fingers touched the watch case, every light in the Lakeview Hall went out simultaneously. The emergency lighting did not activate. Even the jet d'eau on Lake Geneva outside the window stopped. The entire Lakeview Hall plunged into absolute darkness, only the moonlight outside the floor-to-ceiling windows faintly outlining the silhouettes of human figures. In the darkness, someone cried out in alarm. Someone knocked over a wine glass. Someone pulled out a phone only to find that the phone had gone black as well. Shan Duoming stood motionless on the stage, clutching that priceless pocket watch in his hand, his knuckles turning white. The darkness lasted a full 30 seconds. And then the main screen lit up. Not the projection screen inside the Lakeview Hall. It was the giant LED billboard screen on the surface of Lake Geneva outside the windows. That screen usually played advertisements for Rolex and Patek Philippe, but now it had turned solid white. Against that white, a line of black Chinese characters emerged, in a cold, rigid monospaced font, as if spat directly from the command line of some ancient terminal. Shan Duoming, do you still remember that Vernier Caliper? Shan Duoming's body convulsed violently. The pocket watch in his hand slipped and fell onto the stage with a sharp crack. The screen continued to display. 12 years ago, you pushed me out the window on the 39th floor of Building D, Zhongguancun Software Park, Beijing. You thought I was dead. I wasn't. Today, I have come to reclaim what you stole from me. Not revenge. Calibration, you let this world run on falsified data for 12 full years. Every combat readiness delay it caused, every navigational error it produced, every piece of equipment scrapped because of it, the bill falls on you. The distinguished guests in the Lakeview Hall began to stir. Most of them did not understand Chinese, but some started using translation apps to scan the text on that screen. When the translations popped up, the 1978 Romani Conti in the hand of the president of the Swiss Horological Society slipped and fell, blooming a pool of deep red on the Persian carpet. Shan Duoming whipped around toward the backstage area and hissed into the concealed microphone on his lapel. Shut down the screen. This is commercial defamation. Whoever is behind this, shut it down. The screen ignored him. It began to display a document, an internal archived copy of the Invention Declaration for Inertial Navigation Technology, from the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense. Inventor Gu Yan. Invention title: High-Precision Gyroscope based on Cold Atom Interferometer Principle. Application date: March 7, 12 years ago. At the bottom was the review opinion. The signature line for the head of the Technical Review Committee at that time bore Shan Duoming's name. The review opinion consisted of a single line. After evaluation, this invention is deemed a phased achievement of the Tsongming project led by Shan Duoming. It is recommended to change the inventor to Shan Duoming. Then a second document. Internal meeting minutes of Duoming Inertial Navigation Group, time-stamped 4 days after Gu Yan's fall. The minutes were a scanned handwritten document. The handwriting was Shan Duoming's. Lu Jiao had helped him organize countless such documents back then and could recognize it instantly. The first item of the minutes was written succinctly. 1. Alter the lab access control logs to show Gu Yan's last entry time as occurring after his fall. 2. Permanently delete Gu Yan's account and all of its operation logs from the project server. 3. Notify legal to initiate the correction procedure for patent ownership. The third file was a video. The angle of the video was overhead. It was from the surveillance camera at the end of the hallway in Building D of Zhongguancun Software Park. The camera had been functioning normally at the time. But its recording had been deleted by Shun Duanming's people. No one knew how this backup had been recovered. The video showed Gu Yan standing before the floor-to-ceiling window, holding the Vernier Caliper, arguing heatedly with Shun Duanming about something. The audio was unclear, but the body language was unmistakable. Gu Yan pointed at the caliper in his hand, then at the blueprints on the wall, speaking rapidly, his emotions running high. Shun Duanming stood opposite him, hands in his pockets, listening expressionlessly. Then Gu Yan turned around to pick up a laptop from the table. The instant he turned his back, Shun Duanming pulled his right hand out of his pocket, took a step forward, and shoved with both hands. Gu Yan's body smashed through the floor-to-ceiling window and vanished into the night. The video had no sound, but the image of shattering glass exploded silently across the giant LED screen, more deafening than any sound could have been. Shun Duanming stood at the window and looked down for about 10 seconds. Then he pulled a cell phone from his pocket, dialed a number and spoke a few sentences. There was no sound in the video, but subtitles synchronized in the lower right corner reproduced the lip-reading result. Jiao, the project obstacle has been cleared. Work overtime tonight and get the application documents for changing the inventor ready. I'll come by first thing tomorrow morning to sign. Lu Jiao did not stand up inside the Lakeview Hall. She was the only female guest present tonight dressed in civilian clothes, seated in an inconspicuous corner at the back. The moment the video displayed the image of Shun Duanming dialing the number, the glass of non-alcoholic cocktail in her hand trembled slightly. She did not look at the screen, not at Shun Duanming, not at anyone. She simply lowered her head and placed the glass on the small side table beside her with an agonizingly slow motion. Her fingers were slender and pale, her nails trimmed very short. A habit she had maintained for many years, because you couldn't keep long nails when doing inertial navigation testing, as they would affect key press precision. She couldn't break that habit. After the video ended, the screen did not go dark. Instead, it switched to a real-time interface. At the center of the interface was a large line of text, the bottom-level firmware version log for the cold atom interferometer module of the Zhongming time pivot. Below it scrolled dense lines of code annotations and modification records. Every entry was labeled with the submitter, submission time, and modification content. The earliest submitter was Gu Yan. That was Gu Yan's romanized name spelling. The submission time was 13 years ago. All modifications made over the 12 years since then had been preserved in their entirety, the submitter for all of them being Shun Duanming. But the core architecture of the code, the extraction algorithm for the atomic interference fringes, the mathematical model for gyroscope drift compensation, the timing control logic for cold atom cloud manipulation, these most fundamental core modules had never been modified from 13 years ago to the present. In the annotation column of every single core module, there lay quietly a completely identical line of English annotation. Originally authored by Gu Yan. Do not modify without explicit approval. Which meant that the Zhongming system, on which Duanming inertial navigation had spent 12 years and hundreds of billions in funding, proclaiming it as completely independent intellectual property, still bore Gu Yan's name in the bottom layer architecture of its core code to this day. And Shun Duanming had never approved anyone to modify those core modules. Not out of any lingering respect for Gu Yan, but because he didn't dare. He didn't understand that segment of code. He didn't know whether the system would crash if he altered it. So he chose to use it exactly as it was, unchanged, using it while proclaiming to the entire world that he had written it himself. No one knew who in the banquet hall slammed the table first. Then a second and a third person simultaneously started scrolling on their phones. They weren't watching for entertainment, they were placing orders. The stock price of Duanming inertial navigation began to fracture within 60 seconds of the news leaking. And the first massive short position to be placed came from a fund registered in Luxembourg, a fund whose name had never appeared on any mainstream financial ranking. Abyss. Over the past 8 months, it had secretly amassed put options on Duanming inertial navigation totaling over 1.5 billion euros. Shun Duanming stood alone in the center of the stage, no one within a meter around him. His complexion shifted from ghastly pale to ashen to gray, cold sweat oozing from his forehead and glistening greasily under the moonlight. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but only a hoarse metallic scraping sound emerged from his throat. He looked down at the back of his left hand, That scar carved by the Vernier Caliper 12 years ago glowed faintly white in the darkness. He suddenly realized something. Guyen had never forgotten. For 12 years, he had left his own name in every line of the code he stole. He hadn't needed revenge. He had only needed to wait. Wait for Shan Duanming to climb high enough, and then pull the ladder away. Just as an indescribable deathly silence engulfed the entire room, the main door of the VIP hall was pushed open. It wasn't burst open or kicked in. It was steadily pushed by one hand, moderate in force, unhurried in speed, as natural as pushing open the door to one's own shop. A middle-aged man walked in, wearing a washed-out gray work jacket, with 4 red characters embroidered on the left chest pocket. Precision Repair. He was lean, his hair cropped short, the white at his temples startlingly stark under the moonlight. He carried a toolbox in his right hand, not the shiny stainless steel kind, but an old, paint-chipped wooden box with metal corners wrapped in iron, faintly showing the faded letters Suzhou clock and watch. His pace was not fast, but every step was planted solidly, as if he had walked a very long way to get here. Shan Duanming recognized that face. He had thought about that face almost every day for 12 years, not in reminiscence but in fear. That face had appeared every time he went on stage to accept an award, every time he gave a media interview, every time he looked in the mirror. He even felt that face had become his own reflection. But now the real reflection stood alive before him, walking in from the moonlight, walking back from an abyss 12 years deep. Gu Yanjiqiu walked up to the stage and stopped. He didn't look at Shan Duanming. First he bent down and picked up the Tsongming time pivot pocket watch that had fallen on the floor. He put on his loop magnifier, took a pair of tweezers and an extremely fine screwdriver from the toolbox, flipped the pocket watch over, and inspected the sapphire crystal back against the moonlight. Then he unscrewed the case, used the tweezers to lift out the miniature cold atom interferometer chamber at the very center of the movement, and peered at it through the magnifier for about 5 seconds. "The gear is installed backward," he said. The voice was not loud, but everyone in the room heard it. He reinstalled the backward interferometer chamber into its correct position, tightened the screws, closed the case, and wiped the dial with a chamois cloth. Then he turned the crown, fully wound the mainspring, and placed it on a watch timing machine, a timing machine he had brought himself, from that small shop in Taohuawu, Suzhou, its housing polished to a shine, the characters on its buttons worn completely off. The timing machine began printing the rate curve. Once it finished, he tore off the curve paper and held it up for everyone to see. The error range on the curve was a full 3 orders of magnitude larger than what Shan Duanming had proclaimed at the press conference. Not 10 to the negative 12 seconds per year, but 10 to the negative 9 seconds per hour. 1,000 times worse. It wasn't the backward gear issue. He had just fixed that. This error was a fundamental design flaw. The vacuum encapsulation process for the cold atom interferometer chamber had a fundamental problem. They weren't using the getter material specified in the original Kaizhou design, but a domestic substitute Shan Duanming had unilaterally swapped in to cut costs. This material could meet standards under laboratory conditions, but over long-term use it would slowly outgas, destroying the vacuum and causing the interference fringes to drift, which meant that the navigation precision of the strategic nuclear submarines fitted with the Tsongming system would gradually degrade during missions. This defect could not be detected during land-based tests, because each test never ran long enough. But deep beneath the ocean, during strategic deterrence patrols lasting months, this defect would accumulate into an error large enough to make a missile miss its target. Seeing this error curve, the Swiss horology experts in the room collectively gasped. They might not understand strategic nuclear submarines, but they understood precision. A timekeeping device claiming an annual error of 10 to the negative 12 seconds, but having an actual hourly error of 10 to the negative 9 seconds. In the watchmaking world, that wasn't called error. That was called fraud. Shan Duanming's legs finally gave out. He collapsed onto the edge of the stage, his legs dangling limply like a marionette whose strings had been cut, his lips quivering as he repeated the same sentence over and over. Impossible. That material passed the National New Materials Center certification. Impossible. Gu Yan did not reply to him. He closed the toolbox and placed it on the stage, then addressed the entire room. The repair plan for this defect, I've already written it up. It includes the specific specifications for the replacement getter material, the supplier contact information, the improved parameters for the vacuum encapsulation process, and all the verification testing procedures that need to be redone after the repair. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and placed it beside the Tsongming time pivot display stand. The casing of the USB drive had a piece of medical tape stuck on it, upon which 2 characters were written with a ballpoint pen, Kazhou. He turned and walked toward the door. When he reached the door, he stopped but did not turn his head. Xiao. He called her name for the first time in 12 years. Lu Xiao's body stiffened, but she did not stand up and did not turn her head. Her eyes stared straight ahead. At the man collapsed on the edge of the stage and at the pocket watch on the stage that had been taken apart and then repaired. Gu Yan said, "Dad had someone bring you a box of Biluakun tea, preaching Ming harvest, left it at your mother's place. Go pick it up when you have time. Tea leaves go stale if left too long." With that, he pushed the door open and disappeared into the shadows of the corridor. He called her Xiao. Not Lu Xiao, not Senior Colonel Lu, not Mrs. Shun. Xiao. That was how he at first called her 20 years ago when they met on the Tsinghua campus. He had called her that his entire life, and had not changed even in the abyss. Lu Xiao lowered her head. A single tear fell onto the cover of the Tsongming time pivot brochure in her lap, landing squarely on Shun Duanming's face. Almost simultaneously with Gu Yan leaving the VIP hall, global capital markets exploded. Although no media were present in the VIP hall at the Swiss watch exhibition, the live broadcast on the Lake Geneva LED screen had been captured on cell phone video by countless passers-by, and was spreading on social media at a geometric rate. The first post was by a tourist taking nightscape photos on the opposite shore, titled, "Holy crap, the big screen on Lake Geneva just got hacked, and now it's showing dirt on a Chinese military contractor." Within 15 minutes, that post had been translated into 11 languages, with global views surpassing 30 million. The stock of Duanming Inertial Navigation began to dive 90 seconds after that post went live. The first sell order came from Zurich. The amount wasn't huge, but it was the first domino to fall. Immediately afterward, sell orders surged simultaneously from Frankfurt, London, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, from 37 trading centers across the globe, moving as if orchestrated by the same conductor. Market makers tried to defend the price but were completely overwhelmed. The selling pressure was too immense. The average daily trading volume of Duanming Inertial Navigation was exceeded 40 times over within 15 minutes. The star market circuit breaker mechanism was triggered 3 consecutive times within 4 minutes of opening, setting the record for the fastest circuit breaker triggers in the board's history. The Hong Kong market was even uglier. Duanming Inertial Navigation's 8 shares had no price fluctuation limits. Within 1 hour, the stock price plummeted from 187 Hong Kong dollars per share to just 19 Hong Kong dollars, a decline of almost 90%. All sell orders ultimately converged toward a single source, Luxembourg, the Abyss Fund. Over the past 8 months, this fund had not only secretly amassed put options on Duanming Inertial Navigation, but had also gradually shorted the stock through dozens of nominee accounts distributed across 7 jurisdictions. The precision of its operation, the secrecy of its layout, the accuracy of its timing. It would later be dubbed by The Economist as the most perfect financial snipe of the century. And after closing its positions, the Abyss Fund sent an open letter to global investors, consisting of a single paragraph. "We are not making money. We are settling the account for a man who was robbed of 12 years. The market capitalization of Duanming Inertial Navigation collapsed from 800 billion yuan to less than 90 billion in a single day. Wall Street analysts in emergency live broadcasts use 3 words to describe it: collapse, avalanche, nuclear blast. And the Duanming Inertial Navigation shares Shun Duanming personally held had already been entirely pledged to brokerages as collateral. Once the stock price broke through the forced liquidation line, the brokerages began to liquidate. His entire personal wealth evaporated to zero within 24 hours, leaving him an estimated 1.7 billion yuan in debt to the brokerages. When the Geneva dinner dispersed, the Swiss Horological Society did not bid Shun Duanming farewell. Those white-haired old gentlemen rose silently, folded their napkins neatly on the tables, and departed the Lakeview Hall one by one. The last to leave was the president of the Swiss Horological Society. He paused at the doorway, turned around, and said the last words of the night to Shen Duanming, still slumped on the edge of the stage. He spoke in French, translated as, "You have defiled time itself." A few days later, Beijing. The State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense issued an investigation notice concerning the technological origins of the Tsongming inertial navigation system. The notice was severely worded. Preliminary verification confirmed that Shen Duanming, former chief designer of the Tsongming project, was involved in serious disciplinary and legal violations including plagiarism of other scientific research achievements, falsification of test data, and tampering with technical archives, and had been transferred to the military judicial authorities for processing in accordance with the law. Simultaneously, the notice formally confirmed Gu Yan, also known under the alias Yi Zhiqiu, as the original inventor of the core technology of the cold atom interferometer gyroscope, and recognized his major contributions to the technological tracing and defect discovery. The day Shen Duanming was taken away by the military procuratorate, Beijing was experiencing a torrential downpour. He was wearing that Major General's dress uniform, the one from the award ceremony, which he hadn't had a chance to change out of, when he was escorted out of the Duanming Inertial Navigation Headquarters conference room by two armed military police officers. The handcuffs beneath his sleeves glinted faintly silver, polished bright by the rain. As he lowered his head to get into the police van, reporters captured a photo. In the photo, the scar from 12 years ago on the back of his left hand was starkly vivid under the washing rain. That photo would later be repeatedly cited by global media, with captions of all sorts, but the most succinct one consisted of a single word: scar. Lu Jiao was suspended from her duties and placed under investigation. When she was taken in for questioning, she brought only one item: a craft paper archival envelope containing Gu Yan's original design manuscripts from 12 years ago. She had secretly preserved those manuscripts back then, over 200 pages in total, with Gu Yan's signature at the footer of every page. She had kept those manuscripts for 12 years and told no one. When the investigators asked her why she preserved these manuscripts, she was unable to speak. After a very long silence, she said only 4 words: "In case he needed them." During the trial at the military court, Shen Duanming was charged with multiple serious crimes including intentional homicide, attempted infringement of national defense patents, falsification of military equipment test data, and endangering national security. Throughout the proceedings, he kept his head bowed, raising it only once when asked about his motive. He said, "I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to beat him." The judge did not press further. When the gavel fell, Shen Duanming closed his eyes. He was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment for the combined offenses, deprived of political rights for life, and stripped of his military rank and all his military medals. No one applauded in the public gallery. The gallery of the military courtroom was filled with rows of active duty officers in uniform. They hadn't come for the spectacle. They were representatives of the end users of the Tsongming system, navigation engineers from the Navy, the Air Force, and the Rocket Force. Their expressions were even graver than the judges. Because the defect report Gu Yan had submitted meant that all the Tsongming systems already in active service needed to be recalled for repairs. The repair cycle would take at least 2 years, the cost of repairs at least 80 billion yuan. This bill was ultimately laid at Shen Duanming's feet. In the civil judgment attached to the criminal verdict, Shen Duanming was ordered to compensate the state for property losses exceeding 100 billion yuan. Of course, he could not afford it. Gu Yan did not attend the trial. As a specially invited expert of the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense, he had joined a Naval Fleet's Navigation System emergency repair team and was at a submarine base in Qingdao, leading a group of engineers to replace the getter material in the cold atom interferometer chambers submarine by submarine. They stayed in the base guest house, ate the same mess hall food as the submariners, and worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night every day. The titanium alloy support in Gu Yan's lumbar spine, exacerbated by the damp sea winds of Qingdao, ached far worse than it had in Suzhou, but he never missed a single day. He crouched in the cramped navigation compartments of the submarines, tightening every vacuum valve bolt with the touch of a watchmaker, while the naval navigation officer beside him watched without blinking, saying, "Teacher Gu, please go slowly. If you strip this valve, the whole boat has to go back to the shipyard. Gu Yan replied, "Don't worry. I repaired watches in Suzhou for 12 years. I never stripped a single screw." The navigation officer later quietly asked a young engineer beside Gu Yan, "Did he really repair watches for 12 years? The young engineer said, "Really, and his skill was so good he could service a Patek Philippe." The navigation officer was silent for a moment, then said, "Then he's tightened more bolts than all the navigation officers on our boats combined." While Gu Yan was engaged in repairing the Tsongming defects, the complete design proposal for Kaizhou 2.0 was submitted by the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense to the Equipment Development Department of the Central Military Commission. The title page of the proposal was printed with 2 lines: Repair Plan for Cold Atom Interferometer Gyroscope Defect, and Original Design for Next Generation Strategic Grade Inertial Navigation System. Both documents carried only 2 characters in the author signature field. Gu Yan. No prefix, no title, no appended position. After a week-long review by the Expert Evaluation Panel of the Equipment Development Department, the panel head, a white-haired veteran expert in the inertial navigation field, wrote 4 characters in the review opinion field, Pillar of the Nation. When word reached the Qingdao submarine base, Gu Yan was crouched in a nuclear submarine's navigation compartment, replacing the final getter module. A young Navy lieutenant beside him read the review result aloud, and his voice trembled when he reached the words Pillar of the Nation. Gu Yan didn't even look up and continued tightening the bolt. "Don't tremble. The vacuum requirement for this module is 10 to the negative 12 pascals. One tremble and everything is wasted." The lieutenant immediately shut his mouth and held his breath. Once the bolt was tightened, Gu Yan tested it with a helium mass spectrometer leak detector. The needle didn't budge. He stood up and patted the dust off his knees. "All right, this boat's navigation system is cleared to sail." He walked out of the submarine hatch and stood on the pier, the sea wind whipping his work jacket. On the pier sat rows of black nuclear submarines, like a pod of silent whales. He knew that these submarines were equipped with the navigation system he had designed, running the code he had written, containing that cold atom interference fringe extraction algorithm that Shen Duanming could not understand. That algorithm had now been repaired. It could precisely guide these whales through the deep sea, undetectable by any adversary, arriving exactly where needed at the exact required moment. He gazed at those submarines and recalled something Shen Duanming had said to him in the lab 12 years ago. "What you make is too deep, so deep that no one can understand it. If no one can understand what you made, how do you prove you made it?" Now he didn't need to prove it. Those submarines proved it for him. That same month, the full technical proposal for Kaizhou 2.0 officially passed the project establishment review by the Equipment Development Department of the Central Military Commission, and was designated as the technical baseline for our nation's next-generation strategic-grade inertial navigation system. In the same month, the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense announced the inclusion of the Kaizhou series of inertial navigation technologies into the National Major Science and Technology Special Projects, and Gu Yan was appointed as chief designer of the project. Next to his name on the appointment letter were no titles, no academician, no professor, no researcher. Only 3 words: chief designer. This was the first chief designer of a National Major Science and Technology Special Project in the history of Chinese science and technology, without any academic title. During the same week the appointment letter was issued, Gu Yan appeared in Suzhou's Taohuawu for the last time. He pulled down the rolling shutter of the clock repair shop he had run for 12 years for the final time, handed the keys to the owner of the Suzhou pastry shop next door, and said he wouldn't be repairing watches anymore. The pastry shop owner looked at him for a long while after taking the keys and said, "Master Yi, you're the best craftsman in the Suzhou horology world. It's such a pity to just stop." Gu Yan replied, "From now on, what I'll be repairing is a bit bigger than watches." The pastry shop owner didn't fully understand, but he didn't press further. Gu Yan went into the shop for one last cleanup. He packed up the oscilloscope, the ultrasonic cleaner, the watch timing machine, and the screwdrivers and tweezers of every size box by box. He moved the 40,000 receipts covered in secret symbols out of the metal cabinets in the storage room. They filled 12 full archival cartons. 12 cartons, 1 year per carton. He called a cargo van and loaded all the cartons aboard. The driver asked what was inside. They were so heavy. Gu Yan said, 12 years. The driver scratched his head, didn't quite understand, but seeing that this customer didn't seem to be joking, he asked no more. The cartons were transported directly to Beijing and stored in a secure classified archive room, specially prepared for him by the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense. The door plate of that archive room was printed with 7 characters, Kazhou Original Reference Archive. The 40,000 receipts were scanned, catalogued, and filed one by one, permanently preserved as the chain of evidence for the original invention of the Kazhou series technologies. Every line of those seemingly indecipherable symbols on the back of each receipt was interpreted, verified, and confirmed by technical authentication experts. Every line was correct, not a single error, not a single skipped derivation, not a single parameter decided on a whim. The head of the authentication team wrote one sentence in the conclusion field of the final authentication report. All key derivations of this technical proposal are completely presented within the receipts. Their logical rigor and mathematical completeness, unmatched by any published literature in the global inertial navigation field during the same period. This appraisal was later written into the official technical archives of the Kazhou project and became the ultimate ironclad proof of Gu Yan's original inventorship. A month later, the final judgment of the military court on Shen Duanming's case took formal legal effect. Shen Duanming was transported to a military prison in the northwest to serve his sentence. It was said that as he was being escorted into the prison van, he looked back once at the sky over Beijing, then closed his eyes. His prison uniform bore a number, not a name. His military rank, his medals, his academician title, all his honors and wealth had been stripped away. The scar on the back of his hand from 12 years ago became the only thing on his person that could not be taken. Lu Jiao was expelled from the military and discharged from public service. After emerging from the investigation, she did not go looking for Gu Yan, nor anyone else. She boarded a train alone and returned to her hometown in Hunan, moving into the old house left by her parents. In the yard of the old house was a loquat tree, planted by her when she was a child. When she returned, the loquats were just ripe, the tree laden with golden fruit. She fetched a ladder to pick the fruit, and as she picked, she suddenly stopped. She remembered the first time Gu Yan had come to her home 20 years ago. Her mother had washed a plate of loquats for him, and after eating one he had said they were sweet. She packed the loquats she had picked into a shipping box, addressed it to Gu Yan's current work unit, and sent it. After the package was dispatched, she sat in the yard for a long while, then made herself a cup of tea. The tea leaves were the Preachingming Biluakun, the box Gu Yan's father had entrusted someone to bring her, left at her mother's place for 12 years and finally, at last, reaching her hand. She took a sip of the tea. It had gone cold. 44 active duty and retired military personnel who had suffered equipment losses due to navigation errors in the Tsongming system initiated a class action lawsuit, supported by the military court. The defendants were Duanming Inertial Navigation and its principal responsible persons, Shen Duanming and Lu Jiao. The lawsuit was heard by a military civil trial chamber established within the military court system. This was the first class action lawsuit caused by defects in military equipment in the history of Chinese military justice. During the trial, evidence presented by the military's attorney included records of navigation deviations of the Tsongming system during multiple live-fire exercises, investigation reports of naval aviation flight accidents caused by navigation failures, and the technical authentication report submitted by Gu Yan on the defect in the getter material. Among the 44 plaintiffs was a retired navigation officer of the Navy's submarine force. During a deep-sea patrol mission, drift in the Tsongming system had caused his submarine to deviate from its planned course and be locked onto by enemy anti-submarine forces. The entire crew had to maintain absolute silence in the deep sea for a full 48 hours before shaking off the pursuit. On the stand he said, "During those 48 hours I kept thinking it was my own operational error. I blamed myself for 4 years. Now I know. It wasn't me. It was him." He extended his hand, pointing at Shen Duanming in the defendant's dock. Shen Duanming lowered his head. The court ultimately ordered Duanming Inertial Navigation to pay over 1.5 billion yuan in compensation to all victimized military personnel, and to issue a public apology at an all-army equipment work conference. All of Shen Duoming's confiscated personal assets were to be used for supplementary compensation. Liu Jiao was exempted from criminal punishment, but bore joint and several civil liability for compensation. On the day of the verdict, the retired navigation officer among the 44 plaintiffs said only one thing to the military media reporters outside the courthouse. In the deep sea, precision is life. He exchanged 12 years of lies for 4 years of our silence. The reporter pressed, asking what he now wanted to say to the person who had fixed the defect. He thought for a moment, then said, "No need to say anything. He does this work and I do this work. People who do this work speak with their work." Then he rendered a standard military salute, turned around and disappeared into the crowd. Gu Yan did not witness this scene. He was on the pier at the Qingdao submarine base, performing the final acceptance check before the last batch of repaired Songming systems went to sea. After passing acceptance, that nuclear submarine would return to active duty and resume normal strategic patrols. The submarine's navigation officer, a young Navy lieutenant commander, asked Gu Yan as he signed the acceptance forms if he wanted to join the sea trial aboard the submarine. Gu Yan said yes. Wearing his work jacket, he ducked into the submarine's cramped hatch and vanished into the belly of the black steel Leviathan. Outside the submarine, waves surged as it slowly left the pier and headed for open water. The sea surface was windswept, but below the surface was absolute silence. The submarine began to dive. On the screen of the navigation compartment, the angular velocity data from the cold atom interferometer gyroscope updated in real time, the zeros after the decimal point jumping one after another, steady as bedrock. Gu Yan sat in the corner of the navigation compartment, watching those flickering digits. His lumbar spine ached fiercely in the damp, cramped environment of the submarine, but his fingers were perfectly steady. He pulled out the notebook he carried with him, turned to the title page with the group photo of the Kazhou team, and drew an X over Shen Duoming's face. Then he closed the notebook and placed it back into his work jacket pocket. The submarine continued its dive. In the deep sea there was no light, but the navigator knew the way. 3 months later, Kazhou 2.0 passed the design certification review organized by the Equipment Development Department of the Central Military Commission, and was formally installed on a new generation of strategic nuclear submarines, long-range stealth bombers, and deep space probes. That same month, the civilian version of Kazhou 2.0, a high-precision cold atom interferometer inertial navigation system, was promoted for applications in high-speed rail dispatching, deep-sea exploration, civil aviation navigation, and Antarctic scientific expeditions, projected to generate over 800 billion yuan in direct economic benefits for the nation within 5 years. The special funding from the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense combined with civilian licensing fees, added a long string of digits to Gu Yan's personal account within 2 months. He didn't keep a single cent, injecting it all into the Return to Zero charitable fund. When the Return to Zero fund was formally launched, its initial scale was 50 billion yuan, specifically funding 2 categories of beneficiaries: active duty and retired military personnel and their families harmed by defects in military equipment, as well as independent researchers worldwide dedicated to open-source precision measurement technologies. The fund had no application threshold. The sole condition was that those who received aid must, when they had the ability, go on to help another person in need. Gu Yan called this condition the precision relay clause. He said precision was like a flame. One person hoarding it was useless. It had to be passed on. The further it was passed, the more zeros would follow the decimal point. The first beneficiary was not an individual, but a military unit. A certain naval submarine force donated all the compensation it had received in the class action lawsuit to the Return to Zero fund, to support more comrades harmed by equipment defects. Upon receiving this donation, Gu Yan was silent for a very long time. Then he allocated an equivalent sum from his own money to establish a dedicated subprogram under the fund, the Deep Blue Calibration Initiative, specifically providing free vocational skills training and entrepreneurial support for retired submariners. He said, "They calibrated the nation's course in the deep sea. Now someone ought to help calibrate the course of their lives." Another half-year later, Gu Yan presided over a brief naming ceremony on the pier of the Qingdao submarine base. The Navy's newest strategic nuclear submarine was officially christened the Kazhou. At the naming ceremony, the commander of the Navy said, "Carving the boat to find the sword." In the idiom, it's a pejorative. But from today, this phrase takes on a new meaning. Not carving the boat to find the sword, but carving the boat to seek precision. Precision is the bedrock of strategic deterrence. If the bedrock is not firm, the earth trembles and the mountains shake. If the bedrock is steady, the nation is secure and the people at peace. Gu Yan stood on the pier, the sea wind gently ruffling the white hair at his temples. He was not wearing a military uniform, but still that washed-out gray work jacket, the words Precision Repair embroidered in red on his left chest pocket. The Navy commander personally placed the flag bearing the crest of the Kazhou into his hands. The crest's design consisted of a Vernier Caliper and the North Star, with a line of text below, "Precision is life." Receiving the flag, Gu Yan said one thing to the commander. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone on the pier heard it. "I've held this caliper for 12 years. Then he turned around and handed the flag to the captain of the Kazhou. The captain received the flag with both hands and rendered a standard military salute. Gu Yan saluted in return. He was not a soldier. His salute was not standard, but no one on the pier corrected him. Sometime later, the bottom-layer core algorithms of Kazhou 2.0, after a joint assessment by the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense and the National Security Commission, were approved for limited open-source release. This was the first time China had open-sourced the core algorithms of a strategic-grade military technology. The scope of the open-source release was limited to the civilian scientific research domain. Any university laboratory or independent research institution globally could freely download, use, and modify them, with the sole condition that all derivative results must be contributed back to the Kazhou open-source community. Within 24 hours of the repository going live on GitHub, it was cloned by over 50,000 researchers worldwide. A professor of quantum physics at MIT posted on the forum, "I have peer-reviewed over 1,000 papers in my life, and I have never seen a technical document written so clearly. Not a deliberately showy kind of clarity, but a clarity that fears the reader won't understand. Every derivation step is explained in the most accessible language, describing why it was done this way, what alternatives existed, and why those alternatives were rejected. It doesn't read like technical documentation. It reads like someone paving the road for those who come after." Gu Yan left a single pinned post in the repository's issues section. "Take the code. Report bugs if you find them, make suggestions if you have them, submit a pull request directly if you have a better solution. Don't put my name on it. Precision isn't for putting your name on. It's for passing on." Someone asked him why he decided to open source a strategic-grade technology, and he replied with 4 words, "The caliper isn't for keeping." Some understood, some didn't. The retired navigation officer replied under that post, "I get it. A caliper held in your hand can only measure one part. Passed on, it can measure an era." Many years later, someone asked Gu Yan what his greatest achievement was. He said it wasn't Kazhou, nor the Return to Zero Fund, nor the technologies that had changed the military landscape. It was that time when he was repairing watches in Suzhou, and a trembling old woman walked into his shop, pulled out an old Shanghai brand watch from a handkerchief that her late husband had left behind. Its hands stopped for many years. He opened the back case and found it was only a stuck hairspring. With a gentle flick of his tweezers, the watch hands started moving again. The old woman pressed the watch to her ear and listened for a long time, then smiled and said, "The old man is still walking." He said that at that moment he felt himself come alive again. Not because he had fixed a watch, but because someone, without any reason, had entrusted him with their most precious possession. Not because of who he was, but simply because he was there, running a watch repair shop, and was someone who could be trusted. He said the scariest thing about being alive wasn't having no one trust you. It was having no one care. That old woman's watch told him she cared. Even if it was just an old Shanghai brand watch worth very little, it was enough to make a man who had spent 12 years in the abyss believe again that the human world was worth it. From that day on, he no longer hated Shen Duanming. Not out of forgiveness, but because he had already obtained something far more precious than revenge. The ticking of that old Shanghai brand watch endured longer than hatred. Many more years later, Gu Yan's hair had turned completely white. He no longer personally drew blueprints and devoted his main energy to cultivating a new generation of precision measurement engineers. His students were spread across the military, aerospace, deep-sea exploration, and high-speed rail sectors. Every year on the winter solstice, he would return to Taohuawu in Suzhou and stand for a while in front of the old shop, which had been converted into a horology museum. The museum curator was the owner of the neighboring pastry shop from back then. He had taken over the lease and preserved the original furnishings. The oscilloscope, the ultrasonic cleaner, the watch timing machine were all still in their original places, just behind a layer of glass. Under the glass was also a receipt, its back covered in the last string of symbols Gu Yan had ever written there. Beside the receipt was an explanatory plaque that read, "Here lies the final manuscript page of the original derivation of China's strategic-grade inertial navigation technology. Deriver, Gu Yan. Then serving as a clock and watch repair technician at this shop." On the winter solstice, the museum was packed with tourists from all over the country. Gu Yan blended into the crowd wearing an ordinary down jacket and reading glasses. No one recognized him. He walked up to that receipt and stood looking at it through the glass for a while. Beside him, a middle school student asked a companion, "What on earth is written on this receipt? I can't make any sense of it." The companion replied, "It literally says it's a derivation for strategic-grade technology. Of course you can't understand it." Gu Yan said nothing. He turned and walked out of the museum, stepping into the night of Taohuawu. The willows by the river were bare in the winter night, the street lamps casting dappled light and shadow onto the blue stone pavement, just like 12 years ago. What was different was that his lumbar spine no longer ached. Not because the titanium alloy support had disappeared, but because he had long since grown accustomed to walking with it. A man accustomed to walking in the abyss finds every road level. He walked to the small bridge at Taohuawu and stopped, pulled out his phone and dialed a number. A young voice answered from the other end. "Teacher Gu? What's up this late?" He said, "That new process for the vacuum encapsulation of the atom interferometer chamber from last time, I tweaked a few parameters and sent them to your email. Run the tests tomorrow." The young man said okay. He hung up, put the phone back in his pocket, and then pulled out a Vernier Caliper from his other pocket. The very one from 12 years ago, the one he had clutched in his hand as he fell from the 39th floor. Its tip still stained with the blood from the scar on the back of Shun Duanming's hand. He had preserved it for 12 years, applying rust preventative oil annually. The sliding surfaces were still as smooth as new. Standing on the bridge, looking at the reflection of the lights in the river, he raised the caliper to his eye and measured it against the moon. Moonlight slipped through the gap of the caliper and landed in his eyes, a gap of 0.01 millimeters, yet the light that passed through was brighter than moonlight. He put the caliper back in his pocket, turned and walked off the bridge, vanishing into the winter night of Taohuawu. Behind him, the river flowed on without a sound, as precise and silent as time itself. And that mark carved upon the boat was not to mark what was lost, but to calibrate the future.